Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to unravel a really fascinating biological mystery sitting right at the heart of equine conformation. For generations, equestrians, breeders, and judges have prized one specific trait above almost all others: the short-backed horse. It's basically considered the absolute gold standard for structural power. But looking at the groundbreaking research we're exploring today, we've got to ask a pretty profound question. Is this famous anatomical trait actually real, or is it just a really elaborate optical illusion created by the horse's entire body? Think about it for a second. When you picture a perfectly short-backed horse, what exactly are you seeing in your mind's eye? You're probably visualizing this compact, super powerful animal with a tiny distance between the end of its ribcage and its pelvis, right? Tradition tells us that we're looking directly at a dramatically shortened spine. We just kind of assume nature left out a few inches of bone. But, as we're about to discover, human visual perception rarely functions like an X-ray machine. We might not be seeing a shorter spine at all. We might literally just be falling for a brilliant trick of the eye. To really get why this matters, you've got to consider what we call the saddle-fitting anomaly. It creates some massive cognitive dissonance. Picture this. On one hand, you've got a compact 15-hand horse that visually looks incredibly short-backed. On the other, a massive 17-hand horse that looks super long in the back. But here's the kicker. Both of these animals can often comfortably support the exact same 17-inch saddle. Wait, what? If that visually compact horse truly had a drastically shortened spine, that saddle simply wouldn't fit. The functional, load-bearing thoracic support length is actually astonishingly similar between the two. So, where is the shortness actually coming from? To solve this mystery, let's move into Section 1, the anatomical reality, separating bone from perception. Okay, so here's the foundational concept we really need to grasp. We're dealing with two entirely different variables here. First up, we have true thoracolumbar length, or TTL. This is the actual physical anatomical length of the spine, measured literally bone by bone. Then you have apparent back length, or ABL, and this is the visually perceived length of the horse's back, how your brain interprets what it's seeing. The core argument here is that these two variables simply do not correlate as strongly as equestrian tradition assumes. A horse can have a completely average-length spine, yet look incredibly short back to us. Consider the number 24. This number represents the equine axial skeleton, and it is remarkably conserved across almost all breeds of horses. We're talking about nearly all horses possessing exactly 18 thoracic vertebrae and 6 lumbar vertebrae. That's 24 bones making up that central bridge. Because this vertebral count is so deeply consistent, those dramatic visual differences we see between a short horse and a long horse just cannot be explained by missing bones. The skeleton is highly conserved. The math just doesn't support the idea of massive skeletal reduction. So, if the spine itself isn't drastically shrinking, something else must be happening. That brings us to Section 2, geometry of an illusion, the accomplices. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is this fascinating principle: biological scaling is non-linear. Think about it. When a horse gets larger, or its proportions shift, it doesn't just scale up perfectly, like a photocopier enlarging an image. Instead, it undergoes something called geometric amplification. This essentially means that very small proportional shifts in the horse's skeleton combine to create massive perceptual changes to your eye. The eye magnifies those proportional relationships way beyond their actual absolute anatomical size. So, who exactly are these geometric accomplices? Let's run through the lineup. First, we have caudally directed ribs, meaning the ribs sweep backward toward the tail. Second, a deep thoracic barrel. Third, an upright shoulder architecture. Fourth, a high-set neck or cervical projection. And finally, large, visually dominant hindquarters. Now, individually, these are pretty minor traits, but collectively, wow, they actively fill that central body region. They visually crowd the middle of the horse, which drastically cuts down your brain's perception of open lumbar space. Let's walk through exactly how this visual cascade of compactness happens in real time. It's like a chain reaction. Step 1, the ribs angle backward toward the pelvis, actively drawing your eye rearward. Step 2, the thoracic mass deepens vertically, which drops the underline of the horse and makes the ribcage totally visually dominant. And finally, step 3, because the ribs sweep back and the barrel is so deep, the visible loin space, that open gap right before the pelvis, well, it literally vanishes into the silhouette. Suddenly, the horse appears instantly short-coupled, even if its actual spine hasn't changed by a single millimeter. Now, you might be wondering, if it's all an illusion, why do these horses perform so differently? Let's dive into Section 3, the biomechanics of compactness, illusion with real consequences. And this brilliantly illustrates the mechanical trade-offs we see with this geometric configuration. On the benefit side, this compact geometry acts just like a highly rigid, stable bridge. You get increased trunk rigidity, rapid engagement, and super efficient force transfer. The horse feels like an absolute powerhouse under saddle. But look at the costs on the other side. You end up losing that dynamic suspension system. You get reduced elastic deformation, reduced rib flexibility, and much higher compressive loading and tension. Basically, the horse becomes incredibly efficient at stability, but it totally sacrifices fluidity and suppleness to get there. This mechanical consolidation is driven in a huge way by the thoracic sling. Thanks to this specific geometry, these horses usually have remarkably strong abdominal support and a naturally elevated trunk posture. This naturally reduces visible spinal oscillation. They look, feel, and act mechanically solid. And honestly, this explains exactly why traditional breeders actively seek out this apparent geometry. The horse truly is physically powerful and structurally sound. They just kind of misattribute the source of that power to a shortened spine rather than this incredible muscular and geometrical integration. Let's move on and see how this all builds up in our minds. Section 4, the human brain's trick, perceiving the silhouette. The ultimate culprit here is a psychological phenomenon known as optical compression, and it is absolutely fascinating. When you look at a horse, your brain doesn't just isolate individual thoracic vertebrae like a radiologist. It interprets holistic geometry. It looks at proportional transitions, like where does the shoulder end, where does the barrel drop, where does the pelvis begin. The sheer regional dominance of a deep chest and a huge hindquarter literally compresses the visual space in between. Human visual processing naturally misinterprets this proportional crowding as a shortened spine. Basically, your brain is giving you a quick summary, not an accurate skeletal scan. So, the crucial point we need to take away from this is that we have to rethink traditional conformation, without throwing it away entirely, of course. Short-backed isn't a single bone measurement. It is a multidimensional configuration. And look, the terminology absolutely still matters. It remains clinically useful because it reliably predicts a very specific type of powerful, rigid movement. But we have to conceptually separate functional geometric compactness from true skeletal length. It is the emergent geometry of the entire horse, not just the spine itself, that drives the biomechanics. Which brings us to our final thought. The next time you walk through a barn, or look out into a pasture, or assess a horse for its conformation, I want you to ask yourself this exact question. Are you actually seeing the skeleton, or is the horse's whole body geometry just playing a brilliant trick on your eyes? Because once you start seeing those proportional accomplices, the sweep of the ribs, the depth of the barrel, you are never going to look at a short-backed horse the same way again. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you see.